Shalom. Welcome to Understanding the World with Rabbi David Kaufman. I'm joined in the studio by Mark Finkelstein, and coming up just in a few minutes, we'll have Mark Levin, as the Executive Director of NCSJ. He'll talk to us about what's going on in Ukraine and more broadly about Jews in the former Soviet Union. Before we get to that part of the show, it's the world in 5 minutes. So lots of different things that are going on this week. We just returned from the AIPAC Policy Conference, American Israel Public Affairs Committee Policy Conference in Washington, D.C. This policy conference takes place at a time when basically the two major issues that were on the table are both mid-secret negotiations, which makes it really difficult for a lot of things to be discussed by the leading policy people who come to speak to the conference. So, for example, there are currently ongoing negotiations between the Western powers and the government of Iran concerning its nuclear program. But these are secret negotiations, so we don't know where they are. We don't know what's specifically going on. We do know that concessions have been made at a low level, at least at this point, that have allowed several $1 billion worth of Iranian assets to be used by Iran. There are concerns about allowing Iran access to more money and lightening up sanctions that took a good bit of time to put in place to begin with. So that was one issue that was on the table at the policy conference. Another issue that was on the table is the peace process and what the Obama administration is doing in its efforts, led by Secretary of State John Kerry, as he works with Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Abbas. Those negotiations are also taking place in secret. And so it's really difficult. It's been really difficult, I think, for people to come out and say what they meant. So the two major speeches that took place at the AIPAC Policy Conference, one given by Secretary of State Kerry and the other one by Prime Minister Netanyahu, neither one of them were as hard-hitting as they could possibly have been. Secretary Kerry certainly wanted to reassure the people in the conference and the Jewish community more broadly that the Obama administration will do everything it can to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. As I've pointed out on this show multiple times before, the Israeli goal in dealing with Iran is to prevent Iran from having the capability of acquiring a nuclear weapon. It's a different goal, and there's a much different timeline between the two nations' goals. Between Israel's goals regarding Iran and also the United States' goals regarding Iran. And that came up in the two speeches. So Benjamin Netanyahu focused on capability. Secretary Kerry focused on acquiring a weapon as such. Netanyahu's speech was very awkward, I thought, simply because he would go through his speech and he'd say, here's point one, point two, point three, and where you'd expect a conclusion, there was no conclusion because he didn't want to say what he meant. Quite possibly because he didn't want to offend the administration, quite possibly because he was literally told not to say what he meant because he didn't want to interfere with negotiations in either level. So those are both possible, but it was somewhat awkward. One of the major efforts at the policy conference was very clearly showcasing Israeli technologies. There were a number of technologies, security technologies and medical technologies that came out. One of the things that was interesting in Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech is that with the ongoing drought in California, Prime Minister Netanyahu said, you know what, we're water secure now. We have great desalination and irrigation technologies. Why don't we help California? So there are evidently ongoing negotiations between the nation of Israel, state of Israel, and California about water, or at least they'll start soon. AIPAC Policy Conference asked for lobbying efforts on 4 different issues, one of which was the strategic partnership, making Israel a major strategic partner and enabling all kinds of different things to follow because of that. There's a letter regarding Iran sanctions, that if the negotiations fail, sanctions will follow. There was asking our Congress people to support John Kerry in his peacemaking efforts and to support Israel and what it needs to do during the peacemaking efforts, and then asking for foreign aid to be passed so that Israel will receive the military assistance that it gets every year. Today, it was revealed that Israel seized a major shipment of Iranian arms that were coming from Syria through the Persian Gulf. They were supposed to dock at Port Sudan and then be smuggled into Gaza, Port Sudan being in Sudan, and that's been the traditional smuggling route into Gaza, Sudan into Gaza. And these weapons, according to the Israeli government, would have been game changers. They are mid-range weapons that would have allowed strikes from Gaza to Tel Aviv. Excuse me. Sometimes you just can't stop a sneeze, no matter what you do. And the United States had been tracking this shipment, and they basically said if Israel didn't seize them, they would. This would have caused major problems strategically in the region. Coming up shortly, we will hear details of the framework agreement at some point in the next few weeks, and we certainly will be talking about that. We're talking about the framework peace agreement, and that will be coming up soon. That's the week in 5 minutes, the world in 5 minutes. After our break, we will have Mark Levin of NCSJ joining us to talk about Eastern Europe, and particularly Ukraine and Crimea, with the news today that the Parliament of Crimea has declared its independence, right after this break.